Well, hello, friends, and we certainly do hope that you're enjoying the study that we're going through and the sessions that it presents to all of us. Now, we know that over time, questions may come up, observations, and or even statements that you would like to share with us, and we wanted to introduce to you a means by which you can make contact with us, and that is through email at billw@cgi.org. That's billw@cgi.org. We would love to hear from you to help us out as well, because so often, we get into a mindset perhaps and are not aware necessarily of things that are crossing your mind as a result of the material that we may be covering. So don't be shy, don't be bashful, don't hesitate if indeed a question may emerge through the presentations that we share with you, and go ahead and just email us at this billw@cgi.org email address, and we will get them and hopefully over the ensuing weeks be able to address some of them, even perhaps subjects that you would like to see us address. We'd be more than happy to take some of those ideas and maybe build presentations around them. So one more time, billw@cgi.org if you have any questions or statements or observations to make, and we'll look forward to receiving those requests from you. So in the meantime, let's now get back to the study that we're going through. Well, brethren, I wanted to embark on something that we're not going to finish today. It's going to be a journey. It's going to be a journey. We're going to talk a little bit about health and wellness, and I think it's very appropriate in light of especially the time of the season that we're in, with the surrounding circumstances we have with this flu pandemic that all of us have been experiencing for about the last 2 years or so, and of which now entering into the fall and winter season, we all know has certainly an increased risk of us getting sick. And of course, not just necessarily the CCP virus sickness, but even the good old-fashioned swine's flu. Remember that? Seems to have disappeared off the grid for some reason, and everything now is CCP virus, but that's another story. Bottom line is, we certainly do want to make sure that we are cognizant of how we take care of ourselves, especially now that we're moving in, at least in this hemisphere anyway. I know Australia, you're kind of in the opposite realm there, but nevertheless here in this other hemisphere, the northern hemisphere, we are running into what we would consider to be our sickness season. So I think it's apropos. And I wanted to start out by bringing your attention to something over here in Corinthians. So let me bring your attention first of all, and I'm going to just read quite a few scriptures here to establish a premise to launch from, because I think it's very important that we are reminded of this, to give us impetus, to give us motivation, to give us a reason to be compelled to take care of ourselves, brother, to take care of ourselves. And we live in a day and age, quite frankly, when we are surrounded by all different types of technologies, all different types of variations of medications and protocols on handling particular sicknesses and so forth. And I think it's important for us to understand something, that not all that we're surrounded by, including in some cases herbs and vitamins and so on, are not all necessarily good for us. So I want, first of all, to establish something, because it's important that all of us know the responsibility we have as Christians to the Father and Jesus Christ. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16 through 17. Do you know that you are God's temple, and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. For God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own. And this comes from the English Standard Version. That's what I'm reading from here, only because of the way it's worded. A little bit easier to understand. Ephesians chapter 2. Well, let me skip that one for a moment. Let me go over here to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 20. One line here. For you were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body. If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. This is 1 Corinthians 3, verse 17. For God's temple is holy, and you, again, are that temple. John 2:21. But he was speaking about the temple of his body. That was the context when Jesus Christ was explaining that to his disciples regarding him as a being, illustrating once again, we are God's temple as Christ when he was incarnate as God's temple. The same association, the same meaning, the same definition applies. Leviticus 19:28, you shall not make or cut your body for the dead or tattoo yourselves. I am the Lord. That's important, brethren. Why? Because you're the temple of God. So that's why you should not partake and participate in these particular things that people do participate in. Again, 1 Corinthians, back to that, chapter 6, verse 15. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them the members of a prostitute? Never. So says Paul. 1 Corinthians, back to 1 Corinthians 3, but in this case, verse 9. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, and you are God's house. So this is an important concept, brethren, a very important concept that drives home the fact that we are the temple of God. But now the temple of God is more than just physical. It's more than just the physiology of our being and our body. Notice over here in Romans chapter 14, I'd like to take you there for a moment. Romans 14, and in verse 22, breaking into the context, have you faith? Have it to yourself before God. Happy is he that condemns not himself in that thing which he allows. Verse 23, and he that doubts is damned if he eats, because he eats not of faith or belief. This Greek word pistis is fidelity. It deals with faithfulness. If you're not faithful to what you're doing, if, in other words, you're not believing what you're doing, but you're doing it anyway, he says here, Paul says, for whatsoever is not of belief, in other words, you're doing it outside of your conscience. You're violating your conscience in participating, in doing what you're doing. That is another definition of sin. Just like transgression of God's law. Sin, that's a second meaning. And then, of course, to know to do good and not to do it in the book of James. We know that. That's a sin also. Three definitions, three biblical definitions of sin. Yes, it's transgression of God's law. Yes, it's to know to do good and you've got the wherewithal to do it, but you don't. That's a sin. And thirdly, this, Romans verse 23, chapter 14, that what's not square with your conscience, and you go against your conscience, that too is sin. So I want to take a little bit of time. To talk about what is very important, and that is the fact that we are, brethren, the temple of God. What does that even mean? What does that mean? Well, it means a lot. It means an awful lot. But one very important thing that it does mean, brethren, it means, and I want to drive this home, that you are a container, you are an abode, you are a habitat, you are a tabernacle for the Spirit of God. Notice over here in the Gospel of John for a moment. The Gospel of John and in chapter 14. This is a very interesting point to always keep in mind, brethren. Jesus is talking. We read these scriptures during the Passover services many times. You're very familiar with this. Judas, not Iscariot, verse 22, chapter 14, book of John, he states this, Lord, how is it that you will manifest yourself unto us and not to the world? How are you going to stealthily, confidentially, personally, with us, show yourself, but not to the rest of the world? How can you stay invisible to the rest of the world when you're dealing with us? Well, this is an important concept to understand. Jesus answered and said unto him, If a man love me, he will keep my words, and my Father will love him, and we will come unto him, and we will make our abode with him. We, the Father and Christ, in this relationship, and it's a real relationship, brethren, because there's a third element in this, and we're going to see Jesus mention it here in a moment. But it's very important we understand we are the habitat. We are the container. You've heard of the term clay jars? What's in your jar? God. God. And Jesus Christ is in our jar, our clay jar. We are the habitats of God. And, as the Apostle John points out, due to the, what you could say, skewing of and the abandonment of the original apostolic understanding that God is actually alive in you via this item He gave you when you repented and went under the waters of baptism. And that is a reality. And so here we stand, those of us who are baptized, literally impregnated with something supernatural. It's something supernatural. It's an empowerment that provides you and me with the ability to overcome certain defilements, infections, different types of spiritual viruses. I'm going to talk in terms of health and wellness, if you're with me. Because these things are all around us, brethren. And I could give you a litany of all kinds of things here that I'm talking about, but I think you can use your own mind and understand and adjust to a lot of what I'm referring to here. So he continues, verse 24, John 14, he states this, He that loves me not. Okay, here's the contrast. If you love him, then we will abode with you. You will tabernacle with you. We'll come into you, he says. He that loves me not keeps not my sayings. The word which you hear is not mine, but the Father's which sent me. So this is pretty important. This goes beyond even Christ. This goes right to the level of the Father, that you're not disobeying Christ's words, you're disobeying the Father's words, because Christ came to manifest the Father to us. Yes, Christ is a Savior. Yes, Christ was the Word prior to His incarnate condition. Yes, Christ is the Savior of mankind, high priest after Melchizedek. I don't mean to demean or in any way, shape, discredit that. That's very important. But the fact of it is, when Christ was here on earth incarnate, He was here as a representative agent. He was an ambassador for the Father. You're going to see that in a minute. I'm not making it up. Look at this, verse 25. These things I've spoken to you. John 14, verse 25. You being yet present with me. But the Comforter, the Parakletos, the Comforter, that's the item that I'm talking about here. This Parakletos, the Comforter, which is the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, it, that is the Parakletos, shall teach you all things, and bring all things to your remembrance whatsoever I have said unto you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world gives, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled. Let it, he says here, let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. Don't be afraid. Fear has torment, brethren. Perfect love casts out fear. I'm taking some time, brethren, because I need to set this up. Haven't even told you what I'm talking about yet, other than wellness and health. But I want to set this up. So please pay attention to some of the nuggets I'm leaving along the way, the breadcrumbs that I'm leaving here as we begin to set the stage for what we really want to, or what I really want to present to all of you. So Jesus' words are very pointed, they're very precise, and they are very clear. Neither let it troubled, neither let it be afraid. He says here in verse 28 as we close this out, you have heard how I said unto you, I go away and come again to you, and he will in his second coming. If you loved me, you would rejoice, because I said, I go unto the Father, for my Father is greater than I. Jesus is establishing an order, brethren. And it's important for all of us as Christians to recognize Christ in us, Christ crucified. As we imbibe of the unleavened bread during the holy day of days of unleavened bread and the signification of what that represents spiritually of taking Christ in and all the words he represents includes the Father. This is big stuff. The Father is the end of the line. The Father is the controller of all things. Christ is subject to the Father by his own words. The Father is greater than he. All the works, the miracles that Christ did was via the power of the Father working through him. All I'm saying, brethren, is you and I as Christians walk representing the God family in its totality at this point, and that includes the Father. And therefore, like what Paul said in Romans 14:23, it also includes your conscience. What you think and what you feel is a big determining factor on how you operate as a human being. And in our particular case, specifically, as a Christian human being. You see, that makes the difference. That puts a whole new adjective on things. You're a Christian, brethren, human being, and therefore stand for certain things of which we now are responsible for, to keep ourselves, and what am I talking about? What's Jesus talking about? To keep ourselves pure in our activities, to keep ourselves pure in our relationships, to keep ourselves above reproach, as the statement goes, to do the best we can in all the areas of our life, not compromising our values and our standards. We're still setting this up, by the way. It's important we recognize we don't compromise. We don't compromise in this particular case. And we don't participate in, therefore, unhealthy behaviors or unhealthy thoughts and or emotions. We can't forget both spectrums, both sides of the spectrum. We are physiological. We are flesh and blood. We get cold when it's changing weather out there, and we get hot and sweat when it's hot and humid. We are very much so creatures of comfort. We like to be comfortable. We like to be at peace with our surroundings physically. But brethren, the second side of that coin is also, we've got to feel also mentally and emotionally happy, joyful, pleasant, calm, caring, courteous, considerate, mannerly. I could go on and on and on and on, if you know what I'm saying. It's a very, very important thing that we understand that, yes, hygiene, diet are all very, very important, as well as our thinking and our emotional stability. And of course, protocols of health care. Protocols of health care. The presentation I want to embark on, brethren, and focus on is dealing with health and wellness. And it's important that we understand there is a connection between health and wellness and healing. And healing. We live in a world that is very volatile right now, brethren. Very, very volatile. There is so much information out there and around us. We're swimming in information that's good and, unfortunately, bad. It's informative and, unfortunately, misinformative from time to time. But it doesn't dismiss our responsibility as Christians. Does not dismiss our responsibility as Christians, because guess who's being held accountable for your health and wellness? Me? Your neighbor? Your mate? Your children? No. You. You're accountable for your own health and wellness. And as a result, as you will see, even to a certain extent, the possibility of healing. Whoa. Yeah. Yeah. We are, to a certain extent, even responsible for our healing. I can't tell you how many people I've anointed. I've anointed them in good faith with God, asking God to heal them. But would they stop overeating? Would they stop smoking? Would they stop what they were doing that may have even caused what they did? Even after talking with them about finding out a little bit about it and discussing some of their more personal, intimate issues with their struggles? Brethren, you want God to heal you? You got to change things. We've got to also accept the responsibility that there are expectations on us too, from time to time, depending on what it is and to what degree we've allowed the abuse of our own selves occur on whatever it was to take its toll on us over years, decades, and multiple decades. So, I want to share something with you, because the Church of God International has a document that I'd like to introduce to all of you on the internet as well, that probably would be good for many of us to become more acquainted with the teachings of the Bible and the apostolic understandings that this particular administration of God's church, the Church of God International, understands to be. Many of you probably are familiar with our statement of beliefs and have come to understand that if you've been listening to us, whether it be here in Medina or maybe Atlanta or in the home office in Tyler, Texas, you understand that we pretty much understand a lot of the apostolic teachings that have been skewed and twisted and turned and perverted over the more traditional Christian community. But the Systematic Theology Project goes into more detail than just the statement of beliefs. The statement of beliefs are like thumbnail sketches of one-line beliefs. God exists, God's a family, born again, holy days, these things. But the Systematic Theology Project was an outgrowth of roughly about 600 ministers within the worldwide Church of God, and was right in the year about 1977 repudiated due to some personal differences that Herbert W. Armstrong had with his suspect of the changing of the tithing and healing doctrine that the worldwide Church of God held at that time. But the fact of it is, when you get into understanding what the Systematic Theology Project is all about, and the document itself stands for, and I'll just use the acronym STP so you understand what I'm talking about for the sake of time, you will begin to recognize very clearly that it's actually a tremendous document that is clarifying in detail what we understand to be God's truth at this time. Not to say that we know it all. No, we don't. That's why it's called a systematic theology project. It's open-ended, brethren. It's not a sealed and closed document at this point. The ministry of the Church of God International has continued to keep that position in that it's an open document to be added to and or expanded upon as we come into more understanding of these apostolic teachings. And we have just, that is the Church of God International, this administration of God's church at large, completed about a 7-year what you could say clarification of some of the things that were in that document. We didn't change nothing. We just more or less enhanced the clarification. And the Ministerial Council has been working on this for about 7 years and now finally has published it. I'd like to let all of you know that if you're interested in reading this, you can read it on the internet at cgi.org. cgi.org. Go to, on the top there, Our Ministry. Drop down, you'll get a bunch of drop down selections. The first one is the Systematic Theology Project, the first one. Take some time, get oriented, get familiar with these teachings. If you have questions, let your pastor know on the local level. If you want to write me questions, that's fine too, but if you've got a pastor and you're in attendance with a congregation of the Church of God International, ask your pastor, if you've got a question about something, what's this mean? What's this all about? I read this on the other day under Christian living. What's this mean? What do you mean this, then the other thing, Well, in 1977, the Worldwide Church of God repudiated the document, called all the copies into Pasadena, California. Uniquely enough, as you would expect, they not all returned. They were not all returned. Matter of fact, I even had, somebody gave me 2 of them, actually. A couple of people gave me 2 copies of them back in 1983 or 4 or something like that. But at any rate, bottom line is, Garner Ted Armstrong, the one who was kicked out of the Worldwide Church of God and was in essence what I guess some would consider on the secular level the founder of the CGI, although we certainly look to Jesus Christ and the Father, of course, in being that. But as far as the incorporation of this administration, the Church of God International, Garner Ted and the Ministerial Council at that time, back in 1978, ratified the Systematic Theology Project and adopted its statements about what we believe in at that time as a starting point for the Church of God International's understanding of certain theological and doctrinal teachings. So, what that means is from the STP, if any changes are going to occur, then through the orderly process of submitting papers for consideration to the Ministerial Council, they will be changed if indeed they merit change. If not, the debate closes the issue and we continue on the way we understand. And so that was a good thing, because as you can imagine, anarchy, chaos, everybody's uncle and brother, any Tom, Dick, or Harry has an idea, baby, about this, that, or the other thing. We've got what? Total confusion. And to Mr. Garner Ted Armstrong's credit, he understood that right out of the gate. And that Ministerial Council in 1978 and the Board of Directors of the Church of God International in 1978 decided this is where we start. And if we're going to change anything from here, then bring it on and we'll consider it. Because it is, remember, let me remind you, it's a project, a systematic theological or theology project. So it's open-ended. And rightly so, it should be. Because far be it from us to think that we know everything. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of that background because I'm going to quote from it today and essentially reconnect back up here to what I'm talking about with regard to healing, responsibilities of it, and the fact of recognizing, guess what? And I think we're all adult enough to recognize this. God's not healing like he used to in the early New Testament century. First century is what I'm talking about. So let me just take a moment here to quote a few things from the Systematic Theology Project. Healing, and this is under the doctrinal overview of that document in this segment regarding healing. Healing is a continuous biblical theme running from Genesis, where God healed Abimelech and his wife and female slaves so that they could bear children. Genesis 20, verse 17. I'm not turning to any of the scriptures, by the way. If you want to write them down as I go through this, you can, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to turn to any of them. To Revelation, where the leaves of the tree of life will be for the healing of the nations and the new heaven and the new earth. Revelation 22, verse 2. Yet, it cannot be denied that God has extended the miracle of healing in different degrees for different purposes at different times. People have not always been healed with the same regularity or for the same reason. There are few healings recorded in the Old Testament. The very fact that God gave laws of quarantine to ancient Israel proves he did not instantly heal every disease, even in his theocratic state. Israel. If you're sick, quarantine. Stay away from the healthy if you've got any consideration, courtesy, and care. Don't go to work. Call in sick. Don't send your children to school. Do we remember these things? Quarantine. Who ever heard about quarantine the healthy? It's not biblical. If you're asymptomatic, guess what that means? You're probably not sick, or at least enough to where you're infectious. So, brethren, we've got to get back to some of these biblical understandings. Here's another one. I'm quoting back to the doctrinal overview here. It is quite evident that God is not healing today in the same manner or in the same degree that he did in the early New Testament times. It is equally evident that the physiological knowledge and medical expertise of the 21st century today is far advanced over that of the middle or first century, and certainly unrelated to the magical rites and potions of even earlier centuries. This is an insert. I want to bring your attention to this. There was a time in the Worldwide Church of God when they believed that hospitals were butcher houses and doctors were the butchers. That was over the top, brethren, wasn't right. Anybody in their right mind would recognize that. The Worldwide Church of God, in some cases, its passion in some areas did get away from itself. And a balance needed to be inserted. A balance needed to be understood, because there is certain benefits to the modern technology that we have today. I mean, I had my meniscus on my left knee operated on by a doctor. Well, I went to actually two. The first one told me I could never run again. I just ripped my meniscus. I tore it. And he said, nah, why don't you just ride a bike? Look at your age. Ride a bike. Don't run anymore. I said, what do you mean? I want to run. No, don't run. Just ride a bike. I didn't like that. I didn't like what I heard. And I couldn't believe it couldn't be fixed with the technology that we have. So I went to another doctor at another hospital. Young guy, about 40 years old, maybe late 30s, maybe early 40s, I don't know. But buffed, athletic. He says, so you're a runner? I said, yeah. He says, so you hurt your meniscus. He put it up on the machine there. He showed me where it was. He showed me what he was going to do. And I said, will I run again? He said, yeah, 6 weeks you'll be running. I said, really? He said, yeah, no problem. And guess what? I'm running. Technology. And when he did the operation that he didn't even cut me. He drilled a little hole and another one, took care of it. I don't even have a scar. And it's been only maybe 10 months. That's technology, man. That's technology. It's amazing. Years ago, you know what they would do? Slice your knee. Stitches. Then you have to put aloe on to hopefully reduce the scar off your skin, you know. But my point is that technology is good. the insert of balance that the worldwide Church of God put in. This is not written by CGI. This was written by the worldwide Church of God. It was in there. It was in there. And here it is. I read to you about the 21st century advanced over that of the middle and first century, certainly unrelated to the magical rites and potions of earlier centuries. Consequently, Christians today can take full advantage of the latest information in health maintenance and the most modern techniques in health care, recognizing that such proper physical concern in no way detracts from one's faith in God or the ability for God to divinely heal as a manifestation of His mercy and love, unquote. That's a balance. Because guess what? I was in a car accident also. I'll just share a little bit of myself, my own history. Smashed my elbow up, made it into shreds. So they made shish kebab out of my bones. And they put pins in here and put my bones back on the pins. And went ahead and said, okay, and I went to an expert. I searched out, not because I lacked faith in God, but just using common sense, this is my arm. And I'm going to make sure I'm going to get the best care for it. So I went to a specialist. And the guy was the guy who helps the Cleveland Indians, athletes. I use logic. That's the guy I want. He's a bone doctor. Pitchers, they get shoulder, elbows and all that kind of stuff. And this guy was a sports medicine doc. And I chose to go to him. Why? Because he's a specialist. And I can have some confidence that he's going to do the best he can on my arm. And so guess what? I've been fine. After about 3 years of knowing when the weather changed, I get pulsating pains. And my baby finger and my ring finger, pins and needles for about 5 years until it finally worked its way out. Why? Because the body is amazing. The body can heal itself. That's a fact. Of course, depending on circumstances, depending on certain techniques and or procedures or protocols, healthcare protocols that one might choose. These are realities, brethren, that we're all dealing with. Not speaking out of term here. Anybody that knows anything about the human body knows the human body can regenerate itself within limits. Let me continue. The biblical meaning of healing under doctrinal exposition. Healing in the Bible may assume, and I'm quoting now, various forms. The actual biblical usage of the English word heal and the Hebrew Greek words from which it is translated is quite broad. It can mean the healing of the body, as in numerous scriptures, especially as pertaining to the work of Jesus Christ. And indeed, this is its most common usage. But healing in the Bible is not limited to the physical body. It can refer to the healing of the mind and the emotions. Get it? It can be to the healing of the mind and the emotions, whether it be insecurities, whether it be, things that might be bothering you, anxieties, whether it be different types of conditions that you yourself may be dealing with emotionally and or mentally, shyness and what have you. You can be healed, as the Bible says, of these things. It can have a metaphorical connotation. Land, nation of Israel, Gentile nations, the healing of inanimate things such as the earth, water, the altar of the Lord. It can also allude to abstract concepts, and I'm jumping around here within this paragraph, such as healing of faithfulness and backsliding. It also can be used as spiritual healing, for instance, the healing of sin-sick souls, as it were. So these are all things that healing can pertain to, and of which are also included in the broad spectrum of what healing in the Bible is addressing in content and context. Now, continuing on here under healing. In Exodus 15, verse 26, where God states, I am the Lord your healer, the Hebrew word translated healer is Rapha. It is exactly the same word used in Genesis 50, verse 2, which refers to Joseph's servants and physicians. The passage in Exodus could as easily be translated as, I am the Lord your physician. as could the passage in Genesis be translated, translated about Joseph's servants and the healers. Meaning, docs are okay. The challenge is getting a good one. Getting one who knows what he's talking about and what he's doing. The first guy that I went to with my meniscus, I would say that guy didn't know what he was talking about. And he certainly didn't understand me and my motivation and my unwillingness to give up on my knee and concede to a life that I have remaining in me not to run ever again in my life, whether it be on a treadmill or out in the woods where I love to run and watch the deer and everything. So my point is, though, brethren, docs are okay. Docs are okay. But the onus is on us. Find the good one. Find the one you're comfortable with. Find the one that, is in your comfort zone, as they would say. But I go on. He says here, Joseph's servants, the healers. Note that the physicians or healers are not condemned, but are specifically called Joseph's servants. Rapha, I'm back quoting now, Rapha is also the same word found in Exodus 21, 18 through 19. Notice this. When men quarrel, this is a quote now from the Bible, Exodus 21, 18 through 19. When men quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and the man does not die but keeps his bed, meaning stays alive, then if the man rises again, he gets healthy, he gets well, and walks abroad with his staff, he that struck him, this is a law, he that struck him shall be clear, except only he shall pay for the loss of the time of the guy he hurt, and shall have him, the guy who hurt the guy shall have the guy he hurt fully healed. Implication, he takes him to a doc. He takes him to somebody that fixes him up. And you pay for it. Wow. Isn't that something? That'd give me second thoughts if I was in the poorhouse to hit you for saying something. I don't think I'd hit you. Could you imagine? Because you don't have no insurance. Wow, that would stop my fist pretty quick, or my tongue, perhaps. But, of course, this is not God's world. We know that. I'm back quoting now. This shows what Exodus 21, 18 through 19 does. This shows that an individual who caused an injury was responsible to have the injured person healed, indicating that the healing, Rapha, the Hebrew, is not limited to God. 2 Kings 8:29, also 9, verse 15, and 2 Chronicles 22, verse 6. This reads, King Joram returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds which the Syrians had given him in Ramah. Again, healing, Rapha, is used in reference to what men can do for themselves. The contrast of a time to heal with a time to kill, also in Ecclesiastes 3:3, strongly suggests a natural healing process. Back quoting now. This is important, brethren. Listen to what the STP says. There are two scriptures that indicate, although their usage is certainly metaphorical, that the term healing can be used to describe the natural bodily processes that can be aided by external medicines. Jeremiah 51, verse 8. Balm, B-A-L-M, balm, English word, is suggested as a possible way for Babylon to be healed. Give her medicine, perhaps. She can be healed. That's from the Living Bible. In Jeremiah 30, verse 13, talking about Jacob's trouble, prophetically speaking, in that chapter, Jeremiah 30, verse 13, it says, the lack of medicine is equated with the consequent lack of healing. From God's statement to Ezekiel, showing that Pharaoh broke his arm, was not healed because it was not bound up with a bandage. It logically follows that the arm would have healed had Pharaoh, in fact, bound it up properly, set it properly. If I wouldn't have got my elbow set, I may have lost all of my radius of movement. As it is, I only lost 2 degrees of extension. And since I'm 4 degrees overextended, I only lost 2 degrees on this one. I'm still 6 degrees in the plus. But my point is in all of this, brethren, is that we ourselves need to take responsibility that if indeed we get sick, we choose, according to our conscience, what is right, what is comfortable for me, for you. I in the ministry have no right to interfere in your sovereignty of your choice of medical care or whatever health care you choose to do. For me, as a minister of Jesus Christ, to serve in an administration that would force you certain health care actions is wrong, brethren. Why? Romans 14:23, if it goes against your conscience that I'm forcing you, or let me use the word that we all know of really today, mandate you to do something that you're not comfortable with as an organization, church organization, or, and this is why I'm glad I'm not in business today, running my own company, Water Treatment and Waste Systems, WTW Incorporated, my company, 10 employees, serving hospitals, dialysis units, pharmaceutical firms, where we supplied all the high purity water for serums and injectables with, by the way, bacteria and virus filters that were much stringent, much more stringent than your 10-micron masks or higher. That's another story. My point is, for me to exercise mandates on my employees, brethren, I'm glad I don't have to face that trial, to be honest with you. I'm glad I don't have to face that trial, being the owner of my company, because I'm not comfortable with mandating you or me into certain behaviors that you're not comfortable with. We're all adults. We should be able to understand common courtesies, considerations, and if I care for you, and I know some will flip this in this environment that we're at, but let me just say it in this way and in this context. For me to force you into certain behaviors is not fair to you if you're not comfortable with that, especially in light of Romans 14, verse 23. That's why here in Medina, we have, if you want to wear a mask, hey, have at it. Wear a mask. Your choice. But it's not mandated. It's not mandated. But with that being said, brethren, the fact remains is that it is important that we understand that our bodies are indeed our responsibility. And it says here, in this case, that it would have been logical to follow that the arm would have been healed had Pharaoh in fact bound it. This confirms, and I'm back quoting now the STP, this confirms that the biblical usage of healing can include the physical body's normal mechanisms of recuperation and repair as part of its overall definition. My 2 baby fingers from this elbow crash. 5 years, brethren, it was like pins and needles. You know how when your foot falls asleep, we call it, your arm falls asleep, we call it pins and needles kind of a thing. I had it for 5 years in this ring finger and in my baby finger. 5 years, pins and needles. I couldn't get rid of it. It was just there all the time. And as a result, I had to live with it. I had to learn to live with the pain every time the weather would change and it would go more humidity or it was going to rain. It would go boop, boop. And I would say, oh, it's going to rain. It's going to rain, because my elbow would tell me it's going to rain because of the arthritic, I guess, effect or whatever the accident had on it. Bottom line is, guess what? I don't have that anymore. And guess what? My fingers are right, like they were when I was a teenager. How'd that happen? It happened over time because my nerves, I had nerve damage. The nerves grew back and they reconnected, took care of it. My body took care of itself. And I took care of the body, of course. I didn't go back into a car accident and do it again. So the point that I want to make here is, in this case, the STP recognizes the value of the human body. It certainly understands and recognizes. Paul called Luke the divine physician. And Jesus said, those who are sick need the physician. Those that are healthy don't need a doctor. What's that tell us? It tells us that docs are okay. Again, find a good one. But docs are okay. Physicians are legitimate. They're not butchers. They're not butchers in butcher houses, hospitals. That's a wrong way to think. They all have their place. But what are you comfortable with? What are you comfortable with? What's our best medicine? Anybody? Raise your hand. You got an idea. What do you think our human beings, humanoids, humankind, what is our best medicine? What do you think? Raise your hand. Dave?
Prevention.
Okay, that's good. Prevention. Prevention. Margie? Food. You knew. She cheated. Food. That's my wife, by the way, Margie. She cheated. I was looking for food. But, I'm going to get her now on this one. It's besides that. You know what else is good for you? Water. And guess what else? Oxygen. Oxygen. If you don't have oxygen, you won't last very long. And if you don't have water, you're not going to last very long. And so it becomes important that we recognize that these items as well do fall under the, what you could say, category of taking care of ourselves. And this is exactly what Margie and I came into contact with when we began our journey with the Church of God under the administration of the Worldwide Church of God's ministry back in let me take you back in time, to 1973, when Margie and I walked in to the doors with my little daughters, Julie and Michelle. They were just 1 and 2 years old. And we were all bright-eyed and starry-eyed, coming in from the counterculture of the 1960s, Haight-Ashbury, L.A., the whole bit, playing rock and roll music, drums, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Beatles. Oh-ho! Walking into the Worldwide Church of God, Squaresville. People with ties. I didn't put a tie in my life. My father-in-law always used to yell at me, put a tie on, And here we were, and we walked in. The congregation was about 100, 125 people, met over in Brecksville. We walked in, never forget that. That congregation grew to over 450, and then they split, went west side, Gargas Hall, kept over here on the east side, then moved from Berea to Brecksville. And then from Brecksville, I understand, if I remember right, Emmett Temple we went to. Point, though, brethren, is that when Margie and I walked in there, it was all new to us. We didn't have a clue on what we were getting into, other than we had been studying for about a year on our own via the World Tomorrow magazine, watching the program, The World Tomorrow, The Plain Truth, and so forth, reading booklets and pamphlets and reprint articles, getting oriented on what all this was about. As we came into the church, we got to know people. We were viewed a little bit older than we were, only because we had 2 children already, and we were in our early 20s. So we got into the adult arena pretty quick, and immediately began to get exposed to whole wheat, honey, no joke, natural foods. Garlic is good for your blood pressure. Got to be careful, it's also a blood thinner. But it's great antibacteria material. No kidding. Vitamin C. Vitamin C. What are you talking about? Vitamin C. It's good for colds. Take vitamin C. And we got oriented in some of these things. Natural kinds of elements. I got into the water business. My first presentation in Spokesman's Club was about don't drink soft water. Anybody that's drinking soft water, get off it, especially if you've got high blood pressure, especially if indeed you're overweight, especially if you have a heart problem. Get off soft water. Why? Because soft water has an excessive amount of sodium. It regenerates with salt pellets. Those of you who have softeners at home, it regenerates the cation resin with sodium, holds and binds that to the surface of the resin bead, and for every hard ion like calcium, magnesium, and or iron, hopefully not too much, because if you've got too much iron, you need an iron filter in addition to the softener, but that's another story. Bottom line is, the hard ions come in on the cation resin, and guess what the cation resin does? It displaces the sodium. 2 for 1. 2 for 1. Yeah, the water is soft. It won't scale. Your utilities, your washers and dryers will last much longer. You'll rinse and you'll feel greasy a little bit. Take the soap off a little bit. You'll use more water to do that. But nevertheless, the point of it is not good to drink and cook with. Not good to drink and cook. Go to Home Depot, as I call it. Go to Home Depot and go ahead and get yourself a little RO system. Put a T in your cold water line. Put a separate faucet for drinking and cooking. Drink the RO water, because it's 65 cents a gallon or whatever it is that you buy at Target or wherever, high purity water like we do here for the church building. You can produce it there at your home for a $250, $350 investment for less than a nickel per gallon. For less than a nickel per gallon. I digress, but you know what I'm talking about from the standpoint of the fact that these are much better for you in terms of this getting rid of the sodium. And if you can't afford that, at least get a carbon filter. Get the chlorine out of your water. Don't drink chlorinated water. It's carcinogen. Chlorine is. Put a carbon filter on that. Just at least go get a 10-inch carbon filter and put a carbon filter on all the water that you use to cook and drink good. It'll be important for you. These are things, brethren, you come to understand, and as you get older, begin to recognize certain benefits. And so Margie and I got involved in a lot of this, and consequently saw a lot of differences in how people handled this information as well. As a matter of fact, I did a presentation on healthy Christian living, dealing with primarily sugars, salts, and starches, and gluttony. And it's a 5-part series on the internet. You can see it and watch it. It goes into detail in those segments and in those categories. But the fact of it is that we saw a lot of people in the worldwide Church of God, and I'd have to admit throughout the whole history of our church experience since, that people, even though they may know about natural ways of doing things, vary in their diligence toward it. And they consume excessive amounts of sugars and salts and starches. Then they gain weight and they don't recognize why they're gaining weight. I mean, it's a fact, They have heart problems and blood pressure problems and so forth, but the amount of salt and sugars that they're consuming is obvious that they're not helping the situation. I mean, it may be caused from something else, yes, but sugars and salts are not good if you're thinking of trying to solve things that you're dealing with in your life's experience. So what we began to see was obviously a lot of variables, a lot of different approaches that people took in their diligence and in their level of commitment of addressing this knowledge that they had with regard to what would be helpful if indeed they were able to change certain things in their lifestyles. So where do we go from here? Because I haven't told you what I'm talking about yet. Still setting the stage. Because I want you, hopefully, to think back on some of the key words that I've been talking about as we proceeded through this introduction, because that's what this has been, an introduction to really what I want to talk about. Because what I want to talk about, brethren, if we don't learn how to do what I really want to talk about, we are going to crash into a divided community. It's important that we as Christians understand something, and that is what I said at the outset. all those scriptures I read, which I could have read a whole lot more with regards to us being the temple of God. Those were just a few. Because of time, I went ahead and just said what I said. But in addition, Romans 14, verse 23. What's good for you may not be good for me. What you're comfortable with, I may not be comfortable with. How I may handle a certain sickness that I come down with, which I will. Wayne and I always used to kid on the telephone over the years, because we both knew the flesh was not created to last forever. And it's just a matter of time before something takes us out. All of us. We're all in that same boat. We're all rowing in that same direction. Death, hate to be too morbid about it, but the fact of it is, it's the reality of life. Death is up ahead of us. It might be 10 years ahead. It might be 20. You know, when I was 20, it was, here I'm 70, so it's 50 years at that time ahead of me yet. I didn't know. That car accident could have taken me out. It didn't. I'm thankful it didn't. But it could have. It could have. We never know. We could walk out here today, as my point is, as far as we're concerned, we get taken out. Guess what? In our life, Christ just returned. Because your legacy is what it is. You're done. It's over. Your time, what you created, what you're known for, how the person you are, based on that moment, when you get taken out, disease, accident, whatever, is it. That's what you are. That's who you are. And that's what God will then, resurrecting you, know how to define you and what you're all about. So, point is, in this case, is that we really do have to come to grips with what I really want to talk about. And so next week, we'll get